Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our continuing discussion of the Stuarts and their struggle against the Parliament, right? So we left off in class talking about how Charles I is going to end his 11 years of tyranny, right, when he is forced to bring the Parliament back due to a rebellion that breaks out in Scotland, right? So, and then we also talked about how the Parliament is going to, when they come back, execute one of his best friends and advisors, right? And that this is going to be a massive, like, kind of in-your-face moment for the Parliament, if you will, right? And so what's going to end up going down, though, after that is under the advisement of Henrietta Maria, who actually told him that she heard a rumor that actually, like, the Parliament started that rebellion in Scotland deliberately. Charles will march down to Parliament and attempt to arrest its 5 key members. He knocks on the door. He says, "Open the door in the name of the king." They refuse. They say no, and they giggle in his face, which is hilarious. And the 5 leading members of Parliament literally had already escaped out of a back door. So the guys that he had actually gone down there to arrest in their little black robes went tee and then just ran out of the back door. And so what ends up happening, though, or going into it, is what's going to end up going down is Charles is then going to run away to the northern areas of, or like to the areas in England north of London. And the Parliament is going to go into the city of London, and they're both going to recruit an army, right? And if they both recruit armies, that means we have none other than a civil war on our hands, right? But I'm going to clip in this old flip right here that I've used for a couple years. It's really, really great. That explains the English Civil War and also the rise of Oliver Cromwell. But I'll see y'all tomorrow. I'm going to be moving kind of quick, though, so pause as much as you need, okay? So going into it, what we need to understand is that just like in any other civil war, we have 2 factions fighting against each other, right? We have the old model army, a.k.a. the Cavaliers, a.k.a. the Charles supporters, right? So what you need to understand, by the way, a.k.a. also known as, right, is what that stands for. For some of you probably going like so surprised that you actually just learned that. Now, what we need to understand, though, is that the supporters of Charles were mostly made up of the gentry class, right? They were very, actually not gentry, not so much, but like the aristocratic class, right? The rich, the wealthy, the sporty even were actually the ones that actually were very well known for being very, very wealthy, and they supported King Charles, right? So you could actually spot one of them on the street very, very easily because you can actually see them having their mustache, their long hair, and the fact that they were very well groomed, which you need a lot of money to actually do. And then also they were very famously known for having an ostrich feather in their hair, right? Or not their hair, but in their hat. And ostrich feathers were very, very expensive due to the fact that ostrich are from Africa, and it's going to take a lot of money to get that feather all the way to England, right? So the thing about it, though, is these Cavaliers were such an impressionable thing upon history that there are now actually several different universities and several different professional sports teams that have a mascot known as the Cavaliers, right? The Cavaliers, of course, being that fancy swordsman that actually does their fighting and stuff like that. Now, the people that they ended up fighting against were known as the Roundheads, right? A.k.a. the new model army, a.k.a. the parliamentarians, or the Parliament supporters, right? Now, these people were mostly made up of English commoners and Parliament supporters and Puritans, right? A large faction of fighting Puritans, okay? Which is like, that would be a terrible mascot, the fighting Puritans. They don't believe in being drunk in the streets or singing. So, like, what would that school song look like? Oh. So, going into it, though, what we need to understand, I really hope somebody laughed at that. So, going into it, though, what we need to also understand is that we don't know why they were called Roundheads, right? They were possibly called Roundheads because their drummer boys used to shave their head to avoid lice, or because of the rounded helmets that they would wear and the rather like kind of cheaper looking materials that they would actually wear. Now, going into it, though, also something that you should probably know just for a deeper understanding is they didn't name themselves, right? The Charles supporters called these people Roundheads to make fun of them, and then the Roundheads called these people Cavaliers to make fun of them, actually alluding to the fact that they're kind of a foreigner because it actually is like referencing this cavalry division from Spain known as the Caballeros, right? Like, so going into it, though, also, we have to understand how this war is going to go, and also who is leading which side. So, of course, Charles is leading his side, but who is leading the Roundheads? It's none other than a guy by the name of Oliver Cromwell. Now, Oliver Cromwell is a Puritan leader and a member of the House of Parliament, and he is very upset. He's also personality-wise a very intense figure, very puritanical in the fact that he thinks that celebrations of any kind are very, very gross and a misuse of time that you should be going to mass, right? He also believes in the ideas of a Puritan social revolution and thinks that England is going down a path to the devil, right? As I play with this this rubber band. So going into it, though, we need to understand, though, that Charles is going to lose this war, and the Roundheads will be victorious underneath the rulership of Oliver Cromwell, right? And then once they end up winning, they begin to try and push, like, Charles his back against a wall, right? And they basically come up underneath the new leadership of Oliver Cromwell, right? And the parliamentarians decide that they want to force Charles to sign several new documents that will render him a very weak, limited monarch, right? They basically want to create a system in England where the parliament is the supreme power, and then basically the monarchy will be very, very loosely a very weak executive branch. Well, Charles apparently can't bring himself, because of course we know how toxic masculine this man is, he can't bring himself to sign that document. So what ends up going down is the fact that Charles refused to give in to them, and so the Parliament felt compelled to charge him with treason, put him on trial, and they had him executed, right? So they tried Charles I and had him executed. He is the only leader in European history up to this point to be executed by his own people. Now notice I keep saying up to this point, because there is going to be some leaders later on that actually do end up getting executed by their people as well. So we're going to be talking famously about Louis XVI, happened to him and his wife Marie Antoinette when we actually get into what is known as the French Revolution, right? Now, what we also need to understand, though, is what's going to happen now is the King of England is now dead, right? And so they have to make a choice right now. Are they going to replace him with another person, or are they actually going to let England exist without any type of king? They actually decide to choose the latter, right? And Oliver Cromwell begins to create a new government in which he actually creates an England that has no king, which is very, very weird in English history, the idea of having no king whatsoever. And yet again, just like Charles I's personal rulership reign, that was also known as the 11 Years of Tyranny, so began this period of time in English history known as the Commonwealth period. The Commonwealth also lasted 11 years, right? I believe it was from 1651 or 1640 to 1651. No, 1650 to 1661. So, like, now, I'm pretty confident in that one. We'll have to look it up, though. Now, anyway, so the Commonwealth period, though, began underneath Oliver Cromwell. And this is going to be 11 years of time where England has no king. And they are actually going to be formed as a republic. Because as we remember, when we look back to Julius Caesar, the great man that he is, right, or once was, R.I.P., looking forward to the Ides of March, right? So what we need to understand, though, is he is now going to be the ruler of this republican government. And republics don't have kings. They specifically don't have kings. So the thing is, though, is that Oliver Cromwell is going to come in as their leader, right? Eventually, he actually earns himself the title Lord Protector. But the thing about it, though, is Oliver Cromwell, we need to understand, is coming to rulership, right? Even though he's technically not a king, he's the leader of the parliament, right? Or the prime minister, and he believes in puritanical ideas, which is not a very exciting thing, right? I think the English might have bit off more than they could chew in this situation because, y'all, they created a system where a guy is about to ban everything. And how is he able to pull this off? Because parliaments are still elected by the people. So how is this guy going to enter in and start banning stuff left and right, right? Because he's a Puritan, so obviously he doesn't like fun, right? So literally, how is he going to do it? Well, he creates this thing called the Rump Parliament, which serves basically as the executive rulership of the England during the Commonwealth period, right? So what you need to understand, though, is that the Rump Parliament was basically the parliament led by Oliver Cromwell. He comes in and he fires anybody that doesn't agree with him, right? Anyone that doesn't agree with him, he gets rid of them and says that, oh, you are no longer needed within this parliament, and replaces them with puritanical or Puritan-based members of parliament. And then that is why he is so easily able to ban stuff left and right, because everybody in this parliament agrees with him, right? So remember, the Rump Parliament was in charge of England during the Commonwealth period. So what we need to understand, there's some big events that end up going down, which I know some of you are like, oh my God, this list is so long. So calm down. Get the list, okay? The list is important. Now, what he's going to do, though, starting off, he's going to invade Ireland, killing many Catholic priests and civilians, and basically starting an all-out war on the Irish people and also on Catholics almost all together. Remember, Puritans don't like Catholic elements of the Anglican Church. It's how they earned their name, because they were there to purify the Anglican Church of all of its Catholic elements, right? And so he, of course, takes out a lot of anger and aggression against Catholics in England, and then also banishing them to small corners of Ireland, and then also leading large tirades against Catholics in Ireland as well. It actually gets so bad at one point that a lot of English citizens begin to actually, who are secretly Catholic and stuff like that under the reign of Oliver Cromwell, they actually decide to start digging a hole underneath their house, and they literally called it a priest hole, right? It was basically like a little trap door, like under your rug or something like that had a hole underground where you would hide a Catholic priest if they were ever on the run and needed somewhere to go, right? So these secret Catholics would actually hide priests in their house and stuff like that during this repressive reign of Oliver Cromwell, who's basically all but banning Catholicism, right? He also led another war as well against Charles Jr., right? Because the thing about it is Charles I is dead, but remember, he has 2 sons, right? Charles Jr., okay, who actually ran to France with his mother when the war actually started, comes back and becomes the king of Scotland, right? Because once Charles I dies, the crowns of Scotland and England separate again, right? The union of the crowns happens under James I. They separate again once Charles I dies. And they decide to pick Charles II, all right, or Charles, right? Charles Stuart, the younger one, Charles Jr., as their new king, right? And he decides to actually try and invade England directly and take his father's throne back. Well, it doesn't go very well for him, and Oliver Cromwell actually ends up beating him at several large battles, including the Battle of Naseby in the 3rd phase of the English Civil War, right? But what does end up happening, though, is while Charles is actually on the run during this time period, and he actually loses one of these very large battles, he ends up fleeing in a certain direction and hides inside of a home of a regular English citizen who happens to be Catholic, right? To try and hide Charles, they open up the priest hole, put him down in there, and guess who Charles meets? Charles Jr. meets a Catholic priest in this priest hole, and it's then when he begins his conversion to Catholicism, but secretly. Now, going into it, though, we also need to understand, though, that they want him as king, and that's not going to go too well for him, though, and so he does end up losing that war, and Oliver Cromwell stays in power. Other big things that Oliver Cromwell is going to do, though, is he starts banning everything fun. He closes bars, he closes theaters. He fines people for, actually missing mass. He banned sports on Sundays. If your child was caught playing a game on a Sunday when they were supposed to be at mass, and by the way, Puritan mass is super long, they could be beaten in the streets or in front of their own parents, right? He also, literally led a tirade where he tried to cancel Christmas. Y'all, I kid not, my man tried to ban all celebration activities that are actually associated with Christmas, right? Like the 12 days of feasting that comes before Christmas inside of English homes. He tried to get rid of that, right? He also banned Halloween as well. My guy hates everything. He banned pretty or excessive clothing. Perfume was banned under the Commonwealth period as well. So going into it, though, he also pushes this thing known as the Navigation Acts on the colonies, which said that the colonies in America, the 13 colonies that y'all know of, or the burgeoning 13 colonies that y'all know of at this time, because they weren't fully fledged 13 colonies yet, well, he actually passes this thing called the Navigation Act, saying that all products that they buy in the colonies must be transported on English vessels and to stop buying from the Dutch, right? And this is actually going to help lead to the American Revolution, because the colonists begin believe that the tampering with their economy started at that moment, right? Now, one positive thing that Cromwell did end up doing, though, is that the Jews were given safe haven in England, all right? It's important to kind of mention the fact that as a Puritan, he did believe that the Jewish people needed somewhere to go that were actually fleeing the continent, so he allowed them to actually come there, which is really, really good on you, Cromwell. We do appreciate that. And then also, though, he turned England, though, later on, after he realized that the Rump Parliament still just wasn't enough for him, he turns it into a series of military districts and enacts martial law. And he actually uses the military a lot like police force to enforce all these puritanical social ideas that he had. And so the thing about it is he's just as bad as the kings that came before him. If you look at these 2 images that are actually sitting right here in front of us, this one right here is actually of Charles I. It's his wax seal that he used to use on all of the letters that he would send out while he was king. And look at this royal wax seal. It's got Charles I sitting on top of a horse, which is in full gallop, with a dog running underneath him, looking like he's on a royal hunt, right? And then this one right here is the seal of Oliver Cromwell, the Lord Protector. He's on a horse, it's just not running. It's the same thing. Now you called yourself something different. You said you're the Lord Protector, but it sounds to me you stink an awful lot like a monarch, right? Because ironically enough, when Oliver Cromwell actually dies, he actually tries to get his son to take over in his stead, right? And his name was Richard Cromwell, but he only lasted for about a year, right? And the people of England hated Oliver Cromwell so much that they actually deposed his son. Do me a favor, in class, ask me what his son's nickname is, all right? His son had a nickname that British people still refer to him as in history books, and then also in funny little quirky little textbooks and stuff like that, and we'll talk about it in class. It's not something I really want to say on the internet. So going into it, though, ask me about it then, but just like they overthrew his son, they hated the culture that Oliver Cromwell created, right? They absolutely despised this idea of no Christmas, no Halloween, no bars, no theaters, no singing in the streets, no having to go to mass every single Sunday or else receiving a ticket like you were speeding or something like that. So England decided that they did bite off more than they could chew. They hated the Commonwealth period, so they decide to do one other thing. They bring the Stuarts back. I know, which seems super ironic, but it's very, very European, right? To be a little bit petty, to mess up early, and then try to fix it on the back end, right? So they actually entered into this period known as the Restoration Monarchy after Oliver Cromwell died, right? And the people of England hated Oliver Cromwell so much that they actually literally dug up his dead body and then like had an execution for him a year after they actually deposed his son. Oliver Cromwell, head on stick. And so they literally dug up his like crusty body that had been underground for quite some time, and it had actually been decaying and everything, and they dug it up, put it on top of like a scaffold, bent it over, and held an execution for it and cut the head off, right? Then they ran through the streets of England with it, and then they mounted it on top of a bridge, right? And then wind blew it off. This guy found it, and then now nobody knows where it is. So to this day, we have no clue where Oliver Cromwell's head is, right? It's like a lost like Indiana Jones artifact, right? Now, funny enough, though, this whole head decapitation thing happened when this guy comes into power, Charles II. Charles Jr., the same guy that hid in that priest hole that waged war against Oliver Cromwell, actually, right, does end up becoming the King of England because the Parliament was like, okay, so we made a mistake, right? We made a mistake. The Commonwealth period was terrible. We're not big fans of the decision that we made. We would like to bring you back, right? It's like we know we killed your dad, right? Like, so we know we killed your dad, but he started it, right? Like, he started it. It's not my fault. It's his fault. That's why he's dead, right? And so they decide, though, to bring Charles II back, and Parliament re-ushers him in, and they bring him back as King Charles II, right? And when King Charles II comes into power, he decides to try and undo all of the things that Oliver Cromwell started, right? And so because of this, they actually literally call him like the king that brought back partying, right? Because he reopened bars, reopened theaters, worked with Parliament to get all these things done, and undid all the things that Cromwell got rid of, right? He actually is also going to bring back Christmas, bring back Halloween, and bring back other random celebrations as well. And he's also known by a very famous nickname. You should write this down. He's known as the Merry Monarch, right? And there's these guys in England who actually do educational videos who made a really funny video of him that's set to the tune of an Eminem song. Check this out.
My name is Charles II.
Oh, hail the King of Bling. Let's sing, bells ring, ding ding.
I'm the king who brought back partying.
I know it's really, really cringy, but I love that video, and I feel compelled to show it every single year, right? So going into it, though, something you have to understand about it, though, that, like, I don't know if that song brings up, but Charles II, though, does have some tendencies that we need to talk about, right? So first of all, he was a good king, right? The people of England loved him because he comes in after the oppressive Commonwealth period and makes life fun again, right? But also we have to talk about his addictions. My man loved tennis, and he loved women that aren't his wife, right? Like now, so he actually did get married, right, pretty early on when he actually becomes king. He got married to a princess from Portugal. Now, she's Catholic, right? And he's secretly a Catholic, right? He's secretly a Catholic after meeting that priest in that priest hole, right? So the thing about it, though, is like whenever his wife was not around, he was always finding himself at theaters hitting on actresses, right? My guy had 12 different kids with women that weren't his wife, right? And he had 0 kids with his wife because his wife found out that he was doing this and then left and went back to Portugal, but they never got divorced because they were Catholic, right? And so the thing about it that does end up happening, though, is my guy is not leaving any reign or any heirs to the throne whatsoever, and he's doing it amidst some very chaotic times, right? The Great Plague of London and the Great Fire of London are two things that he had to deal with in 1665 and 1666 because literally more than a third of London burnt down and he had to have it rebuilt, and also a plague ended up killing over 1,000 people in London during that time period. Those two events, though, are also the same events that drove Isaac Newton out of London, and he actually went into the countryside where he tried to like find like safety and stuff like that from those two events and actually tried to keep himself safe, where he actually ended up inventing theories on gravitational force, right? So the thing about it, though, is that he does end up dying in 1665, or like 16... Ooh, what year did Charles die? So, yeah, I think it's like 1669. All right, so like I'll have to look it up. But Charles II does end up dying, hilariously, by the way. Ask me about it in class. His doctors basically tortured him to death because they were like, oh, I know you might have had a stroke, but let's just burn you and then blow bird poop into your face. Now, like medical sciences, not that good in the 1600s. But what's going to end up happening, though, since my man doesn't have any kids or heirs to the throne, the Restoration period is not going to die. Rulership is simply going to pass to his brother, James II, right? So now, here's the interesting fact of the matter, though. James II comes to power already married. married, right? And already has a couple of kids, but they're all daughters, right? And all these daughters have been married off to other rulers of other areas, right? Most famously, his daughter Mary was married off to the Dutch leader of state, right? Known as the Prince of Orange. His name was William, Prince of Orange, right? Now, James doesn't have any sons, and so there's no one there to actually to take over the throne. And Parliament's kind of excited about this, right? They're like, okay, we won't have a secession crisis, but we're gonna get somebody else in here in a little while, because James is openly a Catholic. And that's kind of freaking Parliament out a little bit, right? But what does end up happening, though, is the Parliament's like, we're not fretting it because he doesn't have any kids that are like here to take the throne, right? Well, what ends up going down, though, is on his second wife, James ends up getting her pregnant, and she has a boy, right? Who would have eventually become James III if Parliament didn't get involved, right? Parliament, though, was like, we do not want this openly Catholic king to keep his line on the throne. We want Protestant rulership within England because we want to avoid secession crises and any of these other violent, chaotic tendencies that the continent is doing, right? Because the continent had just finished up this crazy war called the 30 Years' War. And so literally the English Parliament wants to avoid climactic shifts like that, right? So the Parliament plots to drive him out, right? And in one of the most biggest moments in European history, this man gets driven off, right? What ends up happening, though, is in the glorious revolution happens when James II, okay, literally runs away from England in a bloodless revolution. Because what ended up happening is Parliament sent word to his daughter, Mary, that I just mentioned a minute ago, who would eventually become Mary II, not to be confused with Bloody Mary, but Mary II, right? Invited his Protestant daughter, who was wife of William of Orange, the Dutch head of state, to come in and run off James. So literally, the Parliament of England told a guy to come and invade their own country, right? And it has not happened since 1066 that England had ever been invaded by a foreign military force and then that military force win, but this will be the second time that it happens, right? William shows up with an entire fleet, and James at first is not worried because he tells his army to go fire at them and to protect him and the country from this invasion. But when this happened, Williams brings a fleet, and the English army put their guns down and just let my man walk in, right? Walk in, had the door open for him, had a plate made for him already. Said, come on in, William, have a seat, right? And this freaks out James so badly that he ran away. Literally, he ran down to the harbor outside of London, took his royal seal, threw it into the harbor, and he literally jumped into a rowboat, rowed off to this ship in the distance, and then went to go see his cousins, and he lived out his days with his cousin, Louis XIV, right? Now, going into it, yes, I said it, Louis XIV, his cousin, right? Lived with him in Versailles until the day he died. But now what that means is a revolution has occurred, right? Because he has run away, renouncing his kingship, throws that seal into the harbor, and leaves, right? And now who is there to take over the throne but his daughter, right? And this revolution is a forcible overthrow of a government or a social order in favor of another, right? So what is going to happen, though, is this revolution was called the Glorious Revolution because William and Mary, the two monarchs of England, now are co-monarchs who gave ruling authority to the Parliament, decided to try and overthrow her dad due to the fact, they overthrew her dad without the shedding of any blood whatsoever. And it happened in 1688. And a couple of the big things that they do the second they come into power is they pass this thing called the English Bill of Rights, which is actually states that you have freedom of speech and free elections within England. And it gives Parliament and the kingship a balanced out power dynamic and creates a true solidified monarchy or solidified limited monarchy within England. And it makes it so absolutism will never be a problem in England ever again. And the thing about it is, though, is if you take the English Bill of Rights, another document called the Petition of Right that Charles I had to sign, you combine them again with one other famous document, and it makes it so a true limited constitutional monarchy existed in England. And that document is called, of course, the Magna Carta. Yeah! You don't ever beat that document because you're just never going to stop that document, right? But I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.